I'm Nima Rajan. Ottawa is pulling non-essential staff out of the Canadian Embassy in Haiti and telling Canadians to avoid non-essential travel to the country. The move is in response to a spike in gang-related violence and fuel shortages affecting hospitals and basic services. American and Haitian authorities are still trying to secure the release of 17 members of a missionary group, including one Canadian, who were kidnapped last month. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other Pacific Rim leaders holding a virtual APEC summit have agreed to work to improve access to COVID-19 vaccines. They also agreed to reduce carbon emissions, but they failed to endorse a U.S. bid to host a meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in 2023. A joint statement obtained by the Associated Press says APEC believes widespread access to vaccines is a priority because, quote, nobody is safe until everyone is safe. The statement also says APEC supports improving trade in COVID-19 vaccines and related medical products, including through streamlined customs procedures. There are 43 long-term drinking water advisories still in place in 31 different First Nations. This is 6 years after Justin Trudeau's 2015 campaign promise to have them all lifted by 2021. New Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu says she's considering what the new timeline should be to lift the remaining advisories. Ms. Hajdu says she hasn't set a new deadline because she's looking at what barriers exist and what stage each community is at in terms of fixing the problems. RCMP officers in Cranbrook, BC are trying to track down whoever defaced the city's cenotaph. Before yesterday's Remembrance Day ceremony took place, someone wrote on the monument, quote, "The real heroes are the vaccinated." In Kelowna, RCMP were dispatched to the cenotaph just before 11 a.m. to break up a demonstration of 75 to 100 people protesting vaccine mandates. One of the 15,000 Albertans whose surgery was delayed because of hospitals being swamped with COVID-19 patients is speaking out about the consequences. 54-year-old cancer patient Sharon Durham of Wynyard lost her entire nose to the aggressive disease and will now have to wear a prosthetic for the rest of her life. She says she could have had some plastic surgery done if the surgery hadn't been delayed, and worries that delays between her appointments will cause the cancer to reoccur. An Ottawa doctor is calling on the federal government to do more to protect healthcare workers. This is after receiving a death threat from organizing mass COVID-19 vaccination clinics earlier this year. Dr. Neely Kaplan-Mirth says she won't be holding her Jabba-Palooza clinics, which were held outdoors in a residential neighborhood last spring when vaccines are approved for younger children. She says the threatening letter has left her feeling unsafe in her own neighborhood. Ontario's latest COVID-19 projections show intensive care occupancy is likely to go up before the new year. The province's Science Advisory Table says it will likely rise to 200 patients in that time. The group of science experts says COVID-19 cases are rising in most of the province's public health units, and test positivity is also increasing. The advisors say predictions regarding future case counts are uncertain because a surge in daily reported infections is very recent. Another major Canadian business leader is coming under fire for not being fluent in French despite living in Quebec. Ian Edwards, the head of engineering firm SNC-Lavalin, has cancelled a Monday appearance at the Canadian Club of Montreal. He is saying he wants to take the time required to better prepare his presentation and ensure it contains more French. The move comes a week after Air Canada CEO Michael Rousseau ignited a political firestorm. This was by speaking very little French during a business speech, then later telling reporters that he didn't need to learn the language to get by in Montreal. Provinces at either end of the country are at odds over vaccinating mink populations against COVID-19. Earlier this month, the BC government announced it is banning mink farming over health hazard concerns. It cited COVID-19 outbreaks on 3 of 9 farms in the province. Meanwhile, Nova Scotia is helping to pay for a COVID-19 vaccine for mink. It is also enhancing the sector by funding licensed breeders in a program to help the industry create market access and adopt animal care standards. Lee Miracle, an author, poet, teacher, and champion of Indigenous stories, has died at the age of 71. Her friend, Michaela Washburn, says Miss Miracle died in a Vancouver hospital on Thursday. Miss Miracle, who was from the Stalo Nation in the Fraser Valley, was one of the first Indigenous authors to be published in Canada. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Up next, we have our weekly energy update with Dan Mctigue. Dan Mctigue is the senior petroleum analyst at gaswizard.ca. All yours, Dan.
Thank you for that, Nima. And yes, it's going to be a very interesting week, I think, for all of us driving. Last week we saw prices rise and then we saw them plummet, only to go right back up again. So we saw prices nearing $1.49 in Ontario. We saw $1.56 in Quebec. The Maritimes came down a little bit, reflecting what happened last week. They have a regulated system there. So anywhere from $1.45 all the way to $1.58 in Newfoundland. On the west coast, Vancouver continued to lead the country with $1.57 at the beginning of the week, going up to $1.63. And now apparently coming down a little bit, while Western Canada, so Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, remain pretty much frozen, where they have been for some time at about $1.42 or $1.43. We're seeing the scenario play out again, and it's not because of anything that's happening in Canada. It really has a lot to do with the move by President Biden to find ways in which to bring down gas prices. As it turns out, energy is an important issue, and gas prices tends to be probably the most important issue in the United States today. No, it's not climate change, and no, it's not the markets, and it's not supply chain issues. Americans are registering their displeasure with the Biden administration because, rightly so, many of them point the finger at his woke policies that are really designed to, as it were, throttle the energy sector there, whether that's preventing permits on certain lands, whether that happens to be the cancellation of pipelines, of which we in Canada know a little bit about. After the first day he took office, President Biden slapped every Canadian in the face by killing the Keystone XL pipeline, even after all of the permits and all of the requirements were met and then some, and the pipeline was in fact half built. What it's created is a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And the only thing the American government can fall back on right now is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And there you have congressmen, senators, and members of the House, especially on the Democratic side, saying, "Oh, release the 400, 500 million barrels of oil we have there." That's great, and that will have a short-term effect on driving down oil and ultimately gasoline prices. But the cost of replacement will be substantial. There's also another recommendation by Americans, and that's stop exports. Let's keep our oil in the United States. The problem is that the United States produces very thin, very light oil. It doesn't produce heavy oil, for which most of its refineries have been configured. So they desperately need Canadian oil. And to do that would really be literally to cut your nose off to spite your face. For our friends in Eastern Canada, the Maritimes and Quebec, which relies on a lot of United States oil, that would also send a devastating blow because, as we know, we don't have a pipeline going to Eastern Canada, much as we should. We also hear a little bit about the Line 5 pipeline heading into Ontario. Looks like there's some light at the end of the day that the Biden administration is maybe thinking it wouldn't be such a brilliant idea. You think? You'd be losing Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and likely other states would follow suit. So I think we're at an inflection point, but there's no doubt in my mind that energy prices are going to continue to remain high and likely go higher. I suggested a few weeks ago $2 a liter wouldn't be out of the ballpark. Certainly, as we head towards higher taxes by the federal Liberal government on April the 1st, April Fools, with another 2.5 cent a liter increase in the first carbon tax, and then on December the 1st, 2022. The all-important 16 cent a liter plus HST or GST, depending on where you're in the country, for gasoline as a result of the implementation of the Clean Fuel Standard. By the way, that's a misnomer. It's a dishonest term. Canada already has clean energy. Not that any Canadian would take into account the fact that we've reduced emissions in our upstream in our energy sector by about 30% over the past decade. Be that as it may, it's going to be another turbulent week on the markets. Also be mindful of the fact, Nima, that we're looking at a scenario where the Canadian dollar is extraordinarily weak. It's not responding to the higher energy prices. And as a result, we're no longer protected, as it were, by the petrodollar. What it's really leading to is a higher cost of living, adding to that inflationary cycle, which I think is going to continue to dog our economy, much because we've decided to trash the most important fundamental energy sector, driver of our economy, that is the energy sector, the oil and gas sector in this country. So that's all for this week. I would expect maybe an average increase of about 2 cents a liter. Beyond that, I think we're looking at more, interesting times in the next several weeks. But we'll continue to come right back here at gaswizard.ca, where you can get the daily predictions 2 or 3 days ahead. And we look forward to doing this again next week. Take care.
Thanks for that, Dan. You can find more information on prices at the pump at gaswizard.ca. All right, up next, the Environment Minister calls for strong language as COP26 closes. We'll have that story and more news from around the world on Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault thinks the final communiqué from the UN COP26 climate talks should include a timeline for phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. Negotiators are still wrestling over a final text as talks went overtime in the 2-week meeting. A draft called for phasing out unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Catherine Abreu, a member of Canada's Net Zero Advisory Body, calls the qualifiers, quote, weasel words. Health Canada has approved the use of Moderna's mRNA vaccine for booster shots. The booster is intended for adults 18 and older to be used at least 6 months after the second shot. The Spikevax COVID-19 booster is a half dose of the regular vaccine. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Teresa Tam released new monitoring on Friday morning. It showed an average of close to 2,500 new cases of COVID-19 are being reported daily nationwide, which is up 11% from last week. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture is asking for financial help from the federal government. This in its efforts to get hay to struggling farmers and ranchers in Western Canada. The Hay West initiative aims to ship hay donated by maritime farmers to prairie counterparts who don't have enough feed for their livestock due to last summer's devastating drought. The CFA says donations have covered the cost of shipping 1,000 bales of hay by rail and truck. But there is more that cannot be sent due to the cost of freight. Experts estimate up to 20% of the Canadian cattle herd could be sold off due to the feed shortage. But the CFA says it hopes the hay donations will help some with breeding stock. The Ontario Energy Board says increases due to the elimination of Hydro One's seasonal rates for cottagers will be phased in over a 10-year period, starting no earlier than 2023. The OEB ruled in 2015 that the seasonal rate must be scrapped. This is because it doesn't appropriately reflect the cost to serve those customers. In a decision on implementing the change released this week, it says some customers will see a decrease, but just over half will see an increase, particularly lower-use seasonal customers. It says increases in most cases will be limited to no more than 10% a year over 10 years. Winnipeg is eyeing a new plan to fight poverty over the next 10 years. And if City Council approves, the strategy will call for new ways to support affordable housing, ensuring public works projects aim to reduce poverty, and earmarking some city jobs for people facing employment barriers. The city estimates about 13% of Winnipeggers live in poverty. This rises to 28% for Indigenous residents and 27% for newcomers. The Winnipeg Street Census also found 1/3 of all Indigenous and newcomer children are affected by poverty. The province of Ontario has applied to seize the proceeds from the sale of a $3.6 million condo in Toronto. It alleges the condo was bought with money defrauded from investors in a cryptocurrency company. The court forfeiture application alleges Kevin Hobbs and a partner raised $33.7 million through Vancouver-based Vanbex and promised smart contracts that never materialized. It alleges the money was used to buy real estate in Toronto and Vancouver, among other things. Mr. Hobbs denies any wrongdoing and tells CTV News Toronto that investigators don't understand the company's cryptocurrency product. RCMP confirmed to CTV that investigation is ongoing, but say no criminal charges have been laid. A 65-year-old woman who has been in the hospital since the April 23, 2018 van attack in Toronto has died of her injuries. Amaresh Tesfamariam's death is now considered a homicide, but Alec Manassian will not face another murder charge because too much time has passed. He was convicted in March of 10 counts of first-degree murder and 16 counts of attempted murder, but has not been sentenced. Yellow Pages says its net earnings rose more than 52% in its third quarter to $13.7 million, despite lower revenues. The Montreal-based company says the gain was the result of restructuring, decreases in depreciation and amortization, and other financial charges. It translated into earnings of 51 cents per diluted share, beating the 53 cents per share that analysts had expected. Yellow Pages says revenue was down nearly 12% to $70.9 million. This is due to a decline in its print and digital media products, but that was also slightly above expectations. Nova Scotia officially sent off a giant Christmas tree to Boston today. The tree is an annual gift in remembrance for the contribution of Boston citizens to the recovery effort after the Halifax explosion in 1917. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Another major American conglomerate is splitting up. Johnson & Johnson is separating the division that sells Band-Aids and Listerine from its medical device and prescription drug business. The new consumer health company is expected to generate revenue of about $15 billion for the year. Earlier this week, General Electric announced plans to split into 3 separate companies. Austria is implementing a lockdown for people who are not vaccinated in 2 hard-hit regions next week, and it looks poised to move forward with similar measures nationwide amid a spike in COVID-19 cases. Starting Monday, non-vaccinated people in the regions of Upper Austria and Salzburg will only be allowed to leave their homes for specific necessary reasons. This includes buying groceries or going to the doctor. Mr. Schellenberg says he and regional leaders will meet again on Sunday and plan to approve implementing those measures across the country. Austria reported 11,798 new infections on Friday. This is up from 9,388 a week ago. The Kremlin has rebuffed allegations that a buildup of Russian troops near Ukraine reflects Moscow's aggressive intentions. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed Western media reports on Friday, alleging that Moscow has intentions to invade Ukraine. Mr. Peskov told reporters that Russia needs to ensure its security in response to alleged NATO threats. Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and has supported a separatist insurgency that broke out that year in eastern Ukraine. The United States has imposed sanctions on the military and ruling party of Eritrea over their role in neighboring Ethiopia's brutal year-long war. A U.S. Treasury Department statement on Friday cited the continued role they play in the war that has killed thousands. Ethiopia's government allowed Eritrean soldiers to enter Ethiopia's Tigray region. They have been accused of atrocities. The U.S. Treasury Department also warned that it is ready to sanction others, including Ethiopia's federal government and the rival Tigray forces, if peace progress is not made. A Taliban spokesman says a bomb exploded in a mosque during Friday prayers in a town outside the eastern Afghanistan city of Jalalabad, and it wounded at least 15 people. Qari Hanif said the bomb appeared to have been planted in the mosque in the town of Tralee. It was Afghanistan's 3rd major mosque bombing in 5 weeks. This is following attacks on 2 mosques on 2 successive Fridays last month. The Islamic State group has been waging a campaign of violence in Afghanistan. An American journalist detained in Myanmar has been sentenced to 11 years in prison. This is after he was found guilty on several charges, including incitement for allegedly spreading false or inflammatory information. Danny Fenster, the managing editor of the online magazine Frontier Myanmar, was also found guilty of contacting illegal organizations and violating visa regulations. Detained since May, Mr. Fenster is the only foreign journalist to be convicted of a serious crime since the army seized power in February. The UK and the European Union remain at odds over a post-Brexit trade spat that may escalate into a cross-channel trade war. Chief negotiators David Frost for Britain and Maros Sefcovic for the EU failed to make much progress at a meeting on Friday over Northern Ireland trade, but they agreed to keep talking. Talks have dragged on, though, for almost a month. Concerns are growing that the situation could develop into a trade war. International agencies warn that more than 1.1 million people in southern Madagascar urgently need food aid. The World Food Programme says that about 700,000 people are already receiving food aid and increased emergency assistance is needed. WFP is working with the Malagasy government and other humanitarian agencies. 4 consecutive years of drought have wiped out crops and exhausted the food reserves of the farming communities in southern Madagascar. The number of deforestation alerts in the Brazilian Amazon has risen for a second straight month compared to last year. The government's space agency said Friday alerts in October corresponded to 877 square kilometers. This is the highest indicator for the month in 5 years and 4.9% more than for the same month last year. September registered 2.3% more alerts than the same month last year. The increases follow 2 months of sharp decreases. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always follow us on our social media channels or online. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.